The grace of our Lord, whose yoke is easy and whose burden is light, be with you and every seeking soul this day and always. Amen. My paternal grandmother lived to the ripe old age of 97. She was a feisty entrepreneur who both terrified and intrigued us grandchildren. Never could she be caught in public without a hat, and that is how I will always remember her. Among the various factoids and accomplishments of her life, her obituary reported that she was survived by her 6 children, 28 grandchildren, 18 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. 2 months prior to her death, our entire family had gathered for her 97th birthday. All of those cousins by the dozens were present on that day, and that newly minted great-great-grandchild had come just in time to join in the celebration. It seemed only appropriate that we squeeze in for a big, fat family photo. We all remarked how incredibly wild it was that we were now 5 generations spanning nearly 100 years of living history. My grandmother, born in 1887, just a few years after the invention of the light bulb and living through 4 major wars, holding her great-great-granddaughter, who would mark the first of a new generation that we would call the millennials. How cool would that be? Social scientists tell us that a new generation is born about every 20 years or so. Each comes with its unique worldview, traits, contributions to the good of society, and yes, of course, quirks and tripwires. And there is nothing like the generation that comes after the generation before to shed the light on the quirks and the tripwires, right? In living history, top of the generation cycle are those traditionalists, or the great generation, like my father, who's turning 90 in September. These were born in the shadow of the Great Depression, duty-bound, hard-working, frugal, with fierce loyalty to the institutions. And the institutions had fierce loyalty to them in return, it seems. They gave birth to the baby boomers, who came into the world during a time of prosperity and stability. They followed that Second World War good feeling that we were all experiencing in this country. The Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement strongly impacted our baby boomer generation. My own generation, appropriately called X, we were shaped by the 80s, and all I can say about that is God help us. While ostensibly Generation X is moving into the driver's seat as boomers retire in rapid succession, I am much more interested to see what freshness and life those millennials coming along behind me will bring to the table. They are that techno generation, but interestingly, a generation that is deeply longing for God and a life of faith, but they're just not going to do it the way the likes of us have done it. They come with fewer hang-ups, and the color of a person's skin or someone's sexual orientation is entirely immaterial to them. They don't live with those kind of rules. A person is a person. And institutions, what's an institution? We are living in interesting times, and with more to come as each successive generation unfolds before our eyes. In church, we are blessed to have all these wonderful generations all under one roof, all the time, maybe at least 5. Indeed, church may be one of the last institutions that is truly multi-generational in its experience. I love that my children get to be a part of Christ and Holy Trinity and have all these surrogate aunties and uncles and grannies and grandpies. It's wonderful how we can all be together and learn from one another and enrich one another. It's like a well-woven tapestry. It's part of our strength. It's part of what makes it beautiful, all these generations interacting. So why all this talk about generations this morning? Well, it seems to be on Jesus' mind. He's trying to figure out his generation. He's trying to make some commentary and some reflection on the times in which he lives. Jesus is trying to figure out this community of people with whom he is living, their blessings, their social contributions, their quirks, their tripwires, and their longings. To what will I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn. Earlier in Matthew, Jesus described his generation as sheep without a shepherd, harassed and helpless. Today, he's saying they're like children playing beautiful music in the square, and nobody notices it. They just keep walking by. Children who are making laments, but no one is weeping. No one is responding. Why is that? Why is it that no one is listening? Why is it that no one is responding? What else has captured their hearts and their attention so? I think of that wonderful passage in Alice Walker's work, The Color Purple. And if you haven't seen that movie in a long time, it's a great film. It's just in a better book. So Shug and Celie are walking through a field, and they're sort of palming the grains, and they're reflecting on their lives and reflecting on who they are. And Shug stops, and it's glorious that day. And she says to Celie, I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in the field somewhere and don't notice it. People think pleasing God is all God cares about, but any fool living in the world can see it is always trying to please us back. We piped a tune, but they didn't dance. No one danced. What is it about this generation? I can hear the deep concern and irritation even in Jesus' voice. And I can relate to it. And perhaps you can too. How often we walk by songs of joy or expressions of beauty, or the poor struggling among us, or even the color purple in the field and don't notice. Perhaps it's just that we are too busy, or we are too anxious, or we are just plain moving too fast all the time. So to what shall we compare our generation? The Energizer Bunny comes to mind. Remember the Energizer Bunny? That little pink bunny with the sunglasses and playing the drum, and the drum never stops drumming. It just keeps going, keeps going. When I read this passage in Matthew's Gospel, and this is that wonderful section where he's talking about discipleship, what it means to follow, we learn that being a faithful disciple is not just about doing all the time. It is also about stopping to open our hearts and our ears to the presence of God among us. Perhaps our generation, like the generation to whom Jesus ministered, would benefit from what they say a chill pill, if you would, to stop doing and producing so much and to simply be in the presence of the holy, in whatever form the holy may show herself. And I'm standing here as a witness to say that it can happen. On my vacation, I learned a wonderful lesson about stopping. This year, my family and I spent Independence Day on a boat from which we watched whales and later the fireworks over Provincetown Harbor, the tail end of Cape Cod. The glorious sunset we experienced was an added bonus. The sea was like glass that afternoon. It was glorious. A ship full of hopefuls went out deep into the Atlantic, our hearts set on seeing a bevy of whales. There were about 75 of us on board. If you've ever been on a whale watch, you know that, or a bird watch, or any kind of a nature watch. I mean, you don't just sort of attack. You have to sort of sneak in. You have to gentle your way to the wildlife. And we were doing that because we had spied a couple of humpbacks that were waiting in the water ahead of us. The previously raucous and chatty boat of people was suddenly hushed. Total silence. 75 people, not a peep. It was as though we were caught up in a moment of liturgy, a moment of worship, all together there on that boat. I don't know the stories of those who had gathered that day or what pains and joys that had embarked on that journey. Who knows what preoccupations had been weighing on their hearts or how fast they had all been traveling when they came aboard. However, in that moment, it was as though all was well in the world. As we waited patiently, there was a sort of peace of Christ that passeth all understanding, feeling in the air, together, still, silent, filled with anticipation and wonder. In that moment, we were all, as it were, held by something greater than the sum of our anxieties. As the humpbacks emerged, their long backs arched as they went again into the waters for a deep dive. As a finale, they waved their flukes in a gentle salute to us all, and like that, they disappeared out of sight. They did this over and over and over and again for us. The air was filled with joy as we gasped for sheer wonder. This great beast, the sort that vexed Captain Ahab, the one that swallowed Jonah whole and held him in the belly for 3 days and 3 nights, had us all in the palm of their fins. I could not help in that moment feel incredibly close to my God at that moment. The wave had come, and we had not missed it. We had not missed a single drop of it. Many of the things that Jesus asks for us to do are very difficult. We look at them and we say, oh my gosh, if that's what it means to follow Jesus, I am failing miserably. The good news is today, the invitation from Jesus is really simple. Just stop. Stop. Just stop for a moment. Get off the train. Embrace the holy that we see when we do. Rest. Rest in the love of the one who loves us as we are. Notice. Listen. Be in awe. Then again, a task such as this may come difficult for some of us. I know it comes difficult for me. Stopping is not always easy. I'm hardwired to be that Energizer bunny. But then again, in doing so, we might just discover our lives afresh. I'd like to offer, as we close, a poem by a Provincetown poet by the name of Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poets, and I recommend her to you. And this one is called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Amen.